I have a little side gig of working at the YMCA. And so this week I walked in and there was a new person sitting at the front desk. I'd never met this person before. And so I went up and said, "Hi, I'm Shelly." And the person said, and went right on back doing their thing. And I thought, "Oh, I just made a bid, like, hey, let's get to know each other." And the person did not respond, turned away, didn't turn against, but turned away. But then later, as I was walking out, the person was really kind and tried to engage. And I thought to myself, either the person was busy or is maybe an introvert and wasn't quite sure how to, because I can be a little much. And I thought, I need to really understand that people are not always who they are in that moment of you giving the bid and them rejecting you. It doesn't mean that they were rejecting you always. So really look around. And it ties into my second story. I am an extreme extrovert, married to the most extreme introvert you've ever seen. And so I am, and my husband is so kind and so, he's wonderful and he really wants friends. But I have stood by and watched him completely turn away from bids several times in our lives, as another man is, they're just talking and the other man clearly has a bid, clearly says, "Hey, you want to get together for breakfast? Hey, you want to," clearly. And my husband just turns it away and will walk away, and I'll say, "Babe, what just happened? What did," and he says, "What?" Like he does not even catch that the other person was making a bid to stretch out and connect with him. My husband just didn't even catch that that was what was going on. And so it really makes me think, as I read this chapter, that we need to continue to bid. The first question was, how do we deal with bids when they're being turned away, and that we need to take into account the personality of the person and what's going on in their world as we make the bids, because it can't just be us thinking, "Well, I made that bid, they turned away, I can't make any more." We just have to consistently try to make more. So that's my introvert extrovert story, and I'm Shelly from South Carolina.
Awesome. Does anybody else have a bid story? Or if not, just you can introduce yourself.
I do. I have one to share. My name is Mary Jane, and I'm from Western Kansas. This week is my birthday tomorrow, and so yeah, I know, and it's a big birthday. I'll just be honest, not too excited about that. But so yesterday, my principal called me last week and said, "Hey, on Wednesday, can you come in and we need to do all this scheduling for next year, like who goes to art when." Scheduling is my thing, so she asked me to help her with it, so I do, which puts me in a bad spot because if somebody doesn't get their spot they love, they're not too happy with me. But anyway, so I go in to do it, and she had thrown this little surprise birthday party. I know, and that is, I'm really extrovert too, and I was very grateful and thankful, but it was really super out of my comfort zone. And so I'm thinking of this book and I'm going, okay, I am not going to talk 1 ounce about school, about COVID, about any of that, and I really intentionally tried to have conversation about personal stuff and things to laugh. And we went from, kids, and when we had a first time mom and all you think about is poop, and to there's this unknown Chinaman buried in our cemetery. I mean, we had this huge conversation. Everybody was laughing, and it ended up being a really, really, really good connecting time. And we all needed that connection together. But I kept intentionally thinking through the whole thing, no, not one thing about school. No, not one thing about this, because I tend to be a task-oriented person. So it was really, and so I sent out thank you notes, and today I'm going to just write an email saying, "Hey, thanks for coming. It was such a great time to connect with everybody personally." So.
Oh, that's so sweet that they did that for you.
Yeah, it was sweet. Very sweet.
I'll go next. I'm Jennifer from Arizona, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning here. So, but the reason I got up so early today is because I just kind of felt that this chapter was probably one of the most important with everything going on right now. And I'm kind of like you, Mary Jane, where I'm very task oriented and I can talk like educational stuff for hours but I'm not like great at like just small talk or you're going to tell me about your trip to the store or something. So for me, it's just, I don't have a story, but it's more about, just trying to be better at that as I step into my coaching role next year, because it'll be my first year. And I think my main goal is going to be all about the relationships, and I have to get better at this part and just getting to know them and really listening and taking an interest. So it's kind of my own goal. So good morning, everyone.
Wow, thanks for getting up early for us. We love that you're here and love that goal. And truly, I believe that this book will help with that. And so these conversations as well that we've had. So I'm so glad that you joined us this morning, super bright and early. Who else would like to introduce? Amy, Jessica?
Hi everybody, I'm Amy Rudd. I don't really have a personal story to share this morning, but I just feel like this chapter really hit me hard because I was thinking a lot about making authentic connections with people, especially like right now, all the things that are so wrong with the world, and just really like trying to reach out and just like say to people, I'm here for you. Tell me what you need. You know, I don't know. Just hard.
I know it's very hard right now. So I'm glad we're coming together, having a chance to talk through it.
Yes.
Yeah, do you have anything?
I'm Jessica. I'm from Michigan. Again, not a specific story. The baby was up all night, so like I'm like zombie mode. But one of the parts that really connected with me was about being persistent, because I know it's a fine line we do have to walk about not over pushing, but like still trying to make those connections. And I think sometimes it's easier for me to shy away, or, oh, they turned away from my bid, like I just need to let it go. But just kind of understanding that some may take time, and to not hold it against someone, not make the assumption. So again, it's like everything that we've already read and talked about coming together. And like one line that stood out is taking the time to connect with others is just as important as taking the time to observe in the classroom. So, you might have to do one before being able to do the other. So just not taking it so personally, not just giving up, but continuing to keeping those bids open and trying to find other ways to connect, which again, it doesn't have to be school. It doesn't have to be so task oriented, which it's easy to fall into, but remembering how people are people, and giving them that grace and letting go of the assumptions and the worries and things like that.
Absolutely. I'll share one that I ran into this week. It was just kind of like awkward. So I'm Allison. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is weird to say because I'm originally from Atlanta. I'm still getting used to my new home location. I'm currently in Daytona, Florida, though, because my parents retired down here like 15 years ago. And so we came up to visit them. And they have a neighbor who they wanted me to meet. And they were like, I want you to meet our neighbor. I want you to meet our new neighbor. And so when I finally got a chance to meet this new neighbor, oh, hold on, Becky's coming in. I finally got a chance to meet this new neighbor. Hold on, where did she go? There she is. Okay, good. Just to make sure she got in. Hey, Becky, welcome. So I guess say hi. It's so nice to meet you. I'm Allison, and I stretch my hand out to shake his hand. But it's COVID, and you're not supposed to touch anybody. And so it was like this most awkward like bid for, nice to meet you. And then he like clearly did not, like he was very much like not going to take my hand. My parents don't live in they live in a neighborhood with, some older folks. And it definitely was just one of those things, people trying to be protective of themselves, which is 100% should be done. And I idiotically stretched out my hand to say hi. and he didn't take it. And I was like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm not supposed to do that. And it was kind of like, it's embarrassing because you're like, gosh, oops, I should have known. But then also like, but this is so normal and now I can't do what's normal. But it immediately felt awkward. And it was kind of that like bid being turned away, but it's like, it has to be right now in this environment. And then just also, we've been talking a lot about going back to school and school starting again, and that we might have to ask students to wear masks during the school day. And just, we talked a lot about how that is going to not allow you literally to have like those just, facial expressions that are smiles or greetings or bids that could be sweet ways to interact with students, or students interact with their peers. And so this COVID thing kind of like putting a weird partition up between our normal greetings, normal ways to give a bid, normal ways to say hi, like shaking a hand. And like, it still kind of sits with me weird that like I didn't get to shake the man's hand. It was awkward, and I was like embarrassed. Like, there's nothing to be embarrassed about, but it was like a rejected bid, and that doesn't ever sit well, even if it's because of a legitimate situation. So Becky, we were just sharing bid stories. If you happen to have something kind of quirky or funny that happened to you recently, if you want to share. If not, you could just introduce yourself and tell us where you are, and then we'll keep talking about the chapter because everybody's already saying how great it's been.
Okay, I don't know that I have anything quirky or funny to share right now. I apologize for being late. I'm babysitting my 3-year-old grandson, so my daughter can work this week. She's a librarian and she's doing inventory. I am in Gaffney, South Carolina. I serve one school as a literacy coach, and this is my 18th year coaching in some capacity. I've been an instructional facilitator, a literacy coach under multiple grants, and have been fortunate enough to be able to stay in the same school for the last 13 years. And so that's where I am, and I'm happy to see you all. I didn't make it last week because my daughter was moving to her new home. So she's the only person I know that would buy and sell a home during a pandemic. And then she moved during a monsoon. It rained every single day the week they moved. So, but they are moved in and settled in. And so I'm here today in their new home, meeting with you all, and it's good to see you.
I do have one funny story I wanted to share. This is kind of like about making connections. I just thought of this. During this year, I was really working to make connections with this one teacher that she's like super talented, and I just want her to spread the love of what she can do with other teachers. So I was working to build relationships with her and everything. And in the hallway, I saw her. I was like, oh, would you like me to get you a cup of coffee? And she's like, oh, sure, that would be great. And I thought, like, I brought a collection of mugs to school to like use real mugs with people instead of paper. Anyways, I brought her coffee, and she's very appreciative. And then I see her later in the day, and she's like, thanks for the mug of coffee. I have some bad news. And I was like, oh, what? And she goes, he broke the mug. The mug got broken. And I was like, oh, like I tried so hard to like build relationships. I was like, don't get upset. Don't get upset. It's just a mug. Let it go. So I'm still working on being persistent with her. But I just want to say, like, being persistent is the message. You just gotta keep working it. Even when bad things happen. Like a broken mug.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we are working with chapter 6 today, which is called Connecting. Everyone has gotten up a little earlier for us today to join at 9 o'clock because I believe it's Jessica found for us a Learning Forward coaches webinar this afternoon that's happening at the same time that we usually meet. And it's Joelle and Killian and a few other coaches talking about how to help teachers reacclimate into the school year. So we thought that was going to be valuable, that if you wanted to participate in that live instead of just watch the replay, that we'd free up the time. So thanks again for changing the window. And I think we'll probably just go back to our normal window next week, just so that we keep everything consistent and we don't ask people like Jennifer to get up at 6 a.m. Hopefully everybody else is not being up way too early. But this chapter about connecting is short, but really, really, really important, especially in just everything that has been going on. I don't even want to say the political climate, because it's really not political climate, but the climate of what we're seeing out in the world right now. And these connections are going to be a vital piece of that for us. So I thought it'd be a great thing for us to talk about. And I have a couple of questions, but we can really go anywhere you want with it. The question was, how do we get teachers to turn towards our bids rather than turn away from them? We've already kind of started talking about how persistence is key. So we could talk a little bit more about the bids, turning it away and towards and against. And then we can talk about the other question, which is how do we kind of stay positive and focus on being witnesses for the good. So what struck you about this chapter related to the bids and connecting with others that we haven't mentioned yet that you want to share? Do you want to point to something specific or just share?
With the being present, and I guess I'm thinking a lot more personal relationships as well, because, we are away from our usual with work and such. But on page 110, there's a lot I highlighted in here. But that one sentence at the end of the first full paragraph, when people pull out their phones, they shut down connection. And I just think it's something we subconsciously do. There's times you don't even realize it. And then just realizing if you are making that bid, like you're going to have to step away from everything else. Like, sure, if an emergency comes up, of course, but like no checking the email, and things like that, and making sure that stuff is away so the person can see you truly are trying to make a connection and it seems more real. And it just that was just a big reminder for me, because it's something I easily fall into. You go to check one thing and then domino effect into where you end up, and just the message that sends when you're doing that.
Absolutely. I even think saying something as simple as just give me a second, I finish this, immediately sends a message that you are not available, and that's enough to turn them away from you. And I find that with my own children.
Well, it's Jessica, I highlighted that same portion there, but a little bit above, just a couple lines above that, it talked about, the moment missed opportunities to connect because we're so focused on work. And I think I mentioned this. I hear something and my mind starts connecting dots, and I start thinking and I'm processing, and I'm just, my mind is going a million miles an hour, and I miss a lot. And when there's a job to be done, I'm going to get it done. It's going to be done right away. And that can tend to be a little bit distracting for people. And then it reminded me back of one of my first PDs that I did a couple years ago when I started. The teachers were on their phones, and then I actually had some who were holding up pieces of paper in front of their mouth so they could talk to the teacher next to them about something and so those things are not welcoming, obviously, at all. So then I'm like, okay, I have to remember that it's not just physical things we do, but it's mental things that I have to keep checking in my mind to make sure that I'm present mentally, because you can tell.
That's what I was thinking, Mary Jane, about being fully present is so difficult because as a coach, you're really meeting the needs of so many different people. It's like you have this classroom and they're all in different places, and they're all in different places emotionally. They're all in different places professionally. And I have this book digitally, so I don't know if I'm on the same page y'all are on if you're in the hard copy of it, but on page 106, it talks about the emotional connections, and that very often I take things personally if someone doesn't seem to connect with me, and I forget sometimes that they have life going on, and they can be going through things that we have no idea what they're going through, and it might have nothing to do with me, but I often take it personally when they don't respond to my offer for support or for help. And I have to remember that really the foundation of that is relationships. And while I've known my teachers a long time, it's almost like when you're in a marriage and you start letting little things needle you and come between your relationship. Sometimes coaching over time does that because you have history. And that, to me, I think I've said this before, I kind of envy someone who's in a new coaching situation, because it allows for different levels of conversation without the history coming into it. So I was just thinking about trying to be fully present and recognize that they have life going on.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Jessica said. There is a wonderful book that my family and I have been reading called Reclaiming Conversations. And it was written by someone who went into schools and researched the conversations that we're having in light of all of our technology. And so I just wanted to read a quote about that she found about cell phones. What phones do to in-person conversation is a problem. Studies show that the mere presence of a phone on the table, even a phone turned off, changes what people talk about, thinking that we might be interrupted. We keep conversations light on topics of little controversy or consequence. And conversations with phones on the landscape block empathic connection. Really, the study of the book is about empathy and how we can help our children develop empathy for each other. If two people are speaking and there is a phone on a nearby desk, each feels less connected to the other than when there is no phone present. Even a silent phone disconnects us. And after reading that, we all sit with our phones right there. We just sit with it on there. And so I have found myself trying to take it off if I'm with someone, just get it out of sight, because we all know in our hearts that if that phone beeps or rings, the person you're speaking with, even if they don't look at it, they're going to be distracted by it, and it lessens the empathy between the two people speaking. So just a little thought about cell phones.
Shelley, who's the author of that book?
I just found it, Sherry Turkle, and I'll put it in our notes too, but I'll also send it over here into the chat just so you can see.
Okay.
I'm on mute. It's an amazing read, and it's not all about with an educational focus, but she does a lot of her research in the classroom, talking about how we can help our kids develop empathy and how technology has hurt us in that way, that they're far less empathic with each other because they're just on their phones. So it's a great read. I highly recommend it.
Well, I, genuinely get super worried, even, coming out of my own household, but then like spilling that over to others with this COVID situation and everything that has been going on, the push to push kids to devices because we need them to be babysat at home while we have to work, and not being able to take them anywhere, do any kind of sports or park playing or anything else or any social connection. It almost just like allows them to go into their hole of technology and isolation even more. And, I think it's one thing for younger students, maybe, they can come out of it and go outside and play. But I think it's going to be hitting very hard on our middle school and some of our, high school age students, where they are going to be very overwhelmed with the isolation because there's no way to get away from it. So yeah, I think that this is really the core, all of our talk here about how to build relationships. One of the things that made me think of just with building emotional connections, another book that I've read that's really powerful in this area is Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead. It would be a great one for us to come around because it's not school focused, but it is a lot about self reflection and self-awareness. But one of the things that she talks a lot about is that you have to be willing to be vulnerable so that you can be in these types of conversations, these emotionally connecting conversations, and that it's really all about your vulnerability. And that's where you have to start, is establishing that, feeling comfortable in that, and realizing that people won't come towards you if you aren't willing to be vulnerable, or if you're not willing to hold the space for a vulnerable conversation to happen. So that's a big thing that kind of hits me about this whole thing that you were talking about, Becky, about, you know, having emotional connections. If we are trying to stay kind of like work-minded and super busy and up on getting our tasks done, then we're not really in the level of place where we're willing to be open and vulnerable with the person across from us casually. Like, I think for us to do our coaching role well, we kind of have to walk into casual conversations, which might be a hallway conversation or a faculty room conversation, and be ready to be vulnerable, not because like you are trying to take it there, but because they might take it there. Like, you know, if somebody just starts opening up about what's going on at their home and, you know, this situation is happening and they're overwhelmed by it, like they've gone vulnerable, you were hoping to go to work. So now you've got to flip your plan and go vulnerable with them. And I've done that before. I've walked into the faculty room just to, like, you know, get a cup of coffee, tried to walk back out, and got caught in an hour-long conversation with the teacher about her son and how he, you know, has learning disabilities, and she's so worried about him. And my own son has learning disabilities, so it was like we had to go there. And by the time it was over, we were praying together and crying. And I'm like, it's only 9:00. But honestly, that was something that I had to be ready for. I have to be ready for all the time. It could go there at any point. So just this ability to kind of like constantly be ready to go to a vulnerable place, even when you weren't expecting it. I think that's something that hit me about this chapter.
For me, as a new coach, I will just share my vulnerability and my inability to really grasp which way is the best way, because in South Carolina, for our new coaches, we read The Art of Coaching. And then we're reading this book just as a group. And the two sometimes will conflict because Aguilar, is that how you say her name? Aguilar, has a whole chapter on it's not about you, it's not your story, you have to be quiet, you're not the one that's telling, you're just there to listen, you're to be holding space and not sharing too much about yourself. And that honestly is really difficult for me and my personality, because that's one way that I connect, to share, oh, you know, I've had a really hard time here, let me share this vulnerability in hopes that this will start a conversation. But in The Art of Coaching, it was really it seemed to me that was not a place for you to, that's not what you need to be doing in coaching. And so it's really hard to know which is the right way to go, which philosophy, how do you meld those together, how do you make it all about the teacher but also allow them to be vulnerable without you sharing your story. So that's been really tough for me. I would love to hear about how anybody else walks that line between being there as a listener but also sharing your vulnerability as well.
Shelley, I think that also speaks to the fact that coaching is a very lonely job because we don't have grade level colleagues that we can share our personal stories with. And and I agree with you and I agree with that idea that is not the place to share our story in a coaching situation, because very often, if you put the focus on yourself, it takes it off of the person that you're talking to. And they're needing us to be there for them. So my husband just has to listen to me. He really doesn't care and he really doesn't respond, but he listens. And I know that he's not going to share it because he really doesn't care. So as long as I'm not sharing things about him, I'm good. But, we have to kind of save those conversations for our colleagues that maybe are outside the building or our best friend, because it is, we're in this kind of alone. And it's a hard job, and people that see people that, leave the classroom and become coaches, and they think they, have this wonderful job. It is a wonderful job, but it's a mixed blessing, because it's a lonely job.
I think I realized self-reflection from yesterday and that party that they had, and that's what I don't like being vulnerable, and I felt like I was putting the vulnerability point being this, and I was really uncomfortable, and that's not my normal. I felt like I was weak. I know that sounds really crazy, but I was self-reflecting. Why does this bug me so much? And I had that opportunity. Like I said, one's a new mom, and she's like, okay, I'll admit it. I just let my baby sleep with me. And she was like looking for affirmation. I'm like, hey, I had twins. You know what? It's about getting sleep, and everybody's happy. Who cares where they sleep? But it's like you have to be vulnerable, but that's a hard spot for me to be in. So I know I need to practice that a little bit more.
In the coaching training I was at last summer, which I mentioned before, and I found some stuff from it, which I was excited, but he kind of talked about like the different type of listeners that we are. And he talked about superficial, and that's being distracted. The self-referential listener, and this is where I fall in a lot, is the conversation becomes about me and my connection story. Like, we think it's building a connection when we're bringing in our own examples or our own thing, but it can really turn someone off, I think, especially in a coaching thing, because they don't want the because then it might, maybe in the way that they could turn away or reject that bid is like, what, you think you're perfect? You haven't been in my room, and things like that. Making sure you're not the fix it listener, just always thinking about how you would fix it, but instead you want to be engaged, which means you're using your full attention and you're seeking understanding through pausing, paraphrasing, and questioning. So kind of like we talked about last week with the questioning. And I am like that. I mean, I looked at it, and I looked at my friend who taught with me for 12 years, and I'm like, I'm self-referential, and I know it drives one of our coworkers crazy. And she's like, yes, you are. So I was so glad. And I still fell into it sometimes, don't get me wrong, but I would catch myself and be like, no, do not tell that story. That is not the time, because it's not about you. It's about them and their unique situation. And again, you want to help them solve it themselves. Like, you're not supposed to be the end all be all, I fix everything, because that can come off wrong too. So keeping those things in mind really helped me. Like, I'm still working on it, but just trying to be, because sometimes I'm trying to be engaged, but I'm shutting down like every thought that I usually go to. So kind of remembering that.
Yeah, Shelley, I think it just reminds me of a couple other places where Jim talks about that in these chapters, where he's saying, you're listening, but there is a time to talk, and there is a time to share, but so much of it is doing what Michael Bungay Senior says, which is being coach-like by listening longer and just letting them talk for longer than you would normally do it. And then when the time is right, either giving advice or telling your story, like allowing it to be dialogue after you feel like you've given ample time and a chance for them to share their thoughts, and let them be vulnerable first, and you come in with them in that vulnerability at some point as well.
I was thinking about this. I always keep in my head, it's not about me. Like, I try really hard to just focus on the person. But I made the connection just now to thinking about if you could have your staff take the personality test. Have you guys read Onward? It's by Alina Aguilera too. So I'm gonna do a book study with some of the coaches I work with in that book. So I was listening to one of the chapters on my walk last night, and she talks about if you have your staff take the personality test that she recommends in the book. it will help you understand their personality type so that you know how to like collectively engage a person of that personality type. So I was thinking about that just now, because if you know someone's an introvert, I feel like you could figure out ways to reach them differently than if they're an extrovert. But I don't know. I don't know if my staff would be willing to take it. That might be its own battle.
I have used that personality test, and it was very telling. And I think my staff members enjoyed it. They thought it was kind of fun. Yeah.
Is the test in the book?
Now, I don't know. The one I found, I think I found online.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think that was chapter 2.
So does she just link to the test, or does she say go find a test?
I can look it up and get back to you guys on where that was in the chapter, because I wasn't taking notes when I was listening. I was just listening.
Yeah, Onward is a good one to really dive into some of this emotional self-awareness. I like the way that she organizes that book because it's by month almost, like August. She organizes it, but you could do kind of like a book study and each month kind of read a chapter with teachers, but it also focuses a little more on teachers. It incorporates coaching things and how you would so it's good for both. Where you could read it with a group of teachers, or you could read it with a group of coaches and use some of those pieces. So it's really a kind of a deeper dive. You know, it would complement well to what we've been talking about here with Better Conversations for sure. So yeah, Amy, if you don't mind sharing that resource, we will link it in the course. Let's talk about the idea of that he talks about trying to keep everything positive, being a witness to the good. What are some things that struck you about that idea in here? Because I think it's vital for us to be successful in all the things that we're doing. You know, in our better coaching, better conversation beliefs are all about really just kind of believing the best and being positive. So that part seems like a good part for us to talk about. Anybody?
I really like that because as a task-oriented person, I see the problem, we tackle the problem, and it's not that I'm not positive or don't see the good, but my task brain goes to, okay, here's what needs to be fixed, or here's what we're working on. Let's get moving towards that goal. We're making a goal, we're meeting the goal, and I don't tend to be a fluff person. So sometimes I feel like that's like fluff. And it's not, don't get me wrong, it's just my personality and I've got to be better at fluff. That's my determination. But with that, not pointless fluff. That's just meaningless. I mean, I don't mean that way, but I've got to say what those things that I'm thinking, just like, yeah.
I was thinking about the times when it's hardest for me to see the good. And on those days, I feel like those are days where I've had like a rough time personally in my home life. Like I haven't slept well, or like I was dealing with my parents, like trying to take care of them at the same time and do work and do the family and everything else. Like when I'm overwhelmed at home, I feel like I am the worst coach. So like trying to keep everything in balance. And I feel like you can have a better positive mindset when all of the things are in balance.
I think we also have to be aware of how we observe the good and how we share that, because I hate like that training we talked about, like one of the things we want to go to very easily is like, oh, I liked this, or it was so awesome this, which sounds very positive, and it is. But at the same time, if you say I like this, that means there were things that you did not like. The vice versa is true. And so he worked with us a lot on, you do evidence and affirmation. So it's like, you did this, which resulted in this or impact this or led to this. So like, you were very specific in the objectives of the lesson, which led to the students being on task and knowing why they were doing it. And so when I would leave like my little sticky notes or something after being invited into a classroom, I was sure to kind of follow that line of something I saw. You had the students in group, which led to more discussion, peer-to-peer discussions. So it's very specific, and it's getting away from those judgmental words, which we again think send a positive message. But the flip side is, if this was good, that means something else was bad. Or if you like this, you didn't like something else. So it's that evidence and affirmation. And you can even go further to like pose a question after it or possible next steps, depending where it is, but always having that observable evidence, being specific about what was done and what the result was.
Connecting with what Jessica said, I am a words of affirmation person. That's my love language. And so I am constantly, especially with my kids, I say attributive comments all the time. You're so smart. You're so this, you're so that. And I've never really held onto and grasped why maybe that's not the best way to say things to them. But the thing that really helped me understand that was on page 119. At the bottom it says, these seem like such a nice thing to say to someone. The problem we see is this: the person inevitably and quite properly relates what you say to how she knows herself to be. You can tell Carlos he is generous, but he knows how generous he actually is. You can tell Alice she is very patient, but she knows her side of how patient she is being with you. And that was like a light bulb going off. You can say to your son, you are so smart, but then they know that maybe they don't feel really that smart. And so it was a light bulb, and I was really thankful for that comment to say, I like how you worked that math problem. I like how you stuck with it. And the same thing with coaches. When I was responsible for several staff meetings where I was delivering PD in a staff meeting, and it was really beneficial to turn to the teacher and say, could you tell everyone else about how you created your mini lesson today, and let them share with it, rather than saying, she did such a good job in her mini lesson. And so it was like a really specific thing that allowed them to teach other teachers, but also said this was something that you did really, really well. But I just love that quote on page 119. It was a big light bulb for me.
Shelley, that reminds me of Peter Johnston's book, Choice Words. And just like we have to be careful about the language we use with children, we certainly have to be aware of the language we use with adults, and that it can come back and backfire on you. And when I was thinking about choice words, the phrase "punished by praise" came to mind, and I Googled it. And Alfie Kahn's book, "Punished by Rewards," that sometimes the language we use or the reward system we use is not what people need to find that motivation from within. And that's really the art of coaching, I think, is finding that thing that person needs to help move them forward professionally. And it's often not what we really think it is, but I think teachers have to find that thing, and then we are there as a support.
I agree. I totally, Shelley, that statement that you made, mine was on 120, the little thing that talks, parents must stop praising their children's intelligence. We have a son that's gifted in math, and life has been pretty easy for him in the math venue. Where you're so smart, not meaning it. I was feeling very guilty about that anyway. I've made some mistakes. And now that he's getting older, he's come across some things that are hard that he has to work at. And we're meeting up with this problem of he doesn't want to attempt it if he doesn't know it right away. Some self things that are really like, I'm not intelligent anymore. So it's so true. And I've made those mistakes with my own child, and I've got to change, we have to change that and relook at that, because it's true.
We were doing a workshop for 2nd grade. It was on writing, and we were actually reading one of the articles written by Carol Dweck about the growth mindset, and talked about how we overused, "Oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so smart," repeatedly. And after I read the article, I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been doing with my son since he was newborn. Like I totally messed up. So we had to make a shift from praising the smartness to praising the process. And I think it helped, but it also helped me understand when I had my daughter, I was like, okay, we are not going to do that. But it's so weird how, like, when you're just really listening to people, that you really do hear people saying that a lot. Like, oh, you're so smart. Okay, maybe you are, but the work that you did is what gets you further, or the work that you're going to do will be what gets you further.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the idea of modeling that language with teachers when we talk to them as coaches can help them know ways that they can change how they're saying things to students. And I also think that that as much as it's amazing to me, as much as Carol Dweck's work is very prevalent, there are still a lot of teachers who have not engaged with it and don't understand the power of a simple phrase and how it can shift mindset, and something as simple as "you're so smart." So like we talked about, I think maybe last week or the week before, we talked about facilitating conversations with your faculty where you're asking, you're trying to change the culture a little bit, and you're asking them to see the value of a conversation. If there's an article or a segment of a book where we can talk openly about this idea of growth mindset with teachers, and then even be specific and say, like, I have had to work on this and I'm trying to phrase things differently, because that modeling and thinking with them around it can help them figure out how they might change small things in their own classroom to change how they're saying things to students. And this book absolutely has convicted me to remember my words. I mean, as much as I feel like I was doing well with that after reading this, again, I am not doing well with this, and I need to go back and I need to do better with my words. And I do think all of us have kind of had a moment with our own families where we're like, oh goodness, because I can probably be okay with my words with coaching, but I realize that sometimes my words are not what they need to be with my own kids at home. And so I've had a lot of soul searching around this book, and just all this time at home in quarantine with my kids, and why are we having flare-ups? Why are we having fits? And realizing with a reflective mindset that a lot of this may be about my own words and what I'm saying, not necessarily just about them and their behavior. And so so anyway, just, crossing through, like, modeling it, but really owning it in a deep place in your own heart, in your personal life, can help you to make sure that every interaction you have with coaches, when you're coaching teachers as a coach, are authentic, and that you're not, we're always not trying to just use our coaching moves on somebody. This is who we are, and we're changing how we talk to our family and to the people we're with every day, so that naturally we will change how we talk to the people who we are interacting with at work. And positivity is something that I always feel like is important. There's a quote, I think it's on top of 119, that says that positivity is going to bring encouragement and inspiration. And so, like, if you kind of keep that in mind, and like you're looking for positive and then you're speaking positive, is that when people are interacting with you, they should be hearing positive, and always trying to catch yourself when you're swirling into the negative, because we have our own opportunities to do that. And like Becky, like you said, we're so isolated that sometimes things get negative. We don't have anybody to talk to. So we start swirling with the teacher, and that's like the last person you need to swirl with. And just really having to stay positive in your interactions with teachers and find someone else to vent to on the other side of things, for sure. Before we wrap up here, anything else on your mind about these chapters? And I think we kind of talked about what the real challenge is for each of us, for sure. And then, maybe we could come around the idea of what's most useful in this time. If there's anything that's really come into you as we're concluding here, what's most useful to you? What's your biggest takeaway from today and from this chapter?
I think for me, one of the things that really just stood out, especially with everything that's going on, these poor kids coming back to school, these connections with them, along with the teachers, is just going to be so important. And the whole being present. I try to do that with my kids now. When they come in my office, I will put down my computer, I will put down my phone, and make eye contact with them so they know that I'm truly listening, because they're inundated with all this technology, and they have to know what it's like to be heard and to know that someone's actually listening. And I think the teachers are also going to need to know that, because there's a lot of stress going on with them too. So that's my biggest takeaway.
I think what I'm going to take away from this chapter is consistently bid, and don't just keep on coming and be consistent and reach out and try to make those connections. I think that it's easy to get your feelings hurt and label a teacher as non-responsive, or she's just going to always turn away from me, but to continue to reach out even when you're turned away from.
Shelley, that kind of reminds me of my takeaway, is that I may have a fixed mindset about a teacher, and that I have to maintain that growth mindset. If I expect teachers to do that for their students, I have to model that as their coach. And I know that I have a fixed mindset about some of my teachers. They're hard to reach and hard to coach, and that it just makes it hard. And when you've got years and years of history of that, it's sort of evident in their lack of growth, that's fed into my fixed mindset, that maybe if I changed my way of thinking, that I could reach them and coach them better.
That's a great thought. Any other good takeaways or most useful to you?
I think I'm going to actually dig out the form through the rest of this summer, the making emotional connections, and purposely and write down what it was, because I think that or at least I do, I think that I've done that and I kind of lose track. So I'm thinking I need to make myself accountable and actually write down those times that I've done it and reflect upon it and take the time to think it all the way through. And what, all of those parts of thinking about what we've done and what we've said.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking about, I agree with everything that we have been talking about, and I appreciate everyone's ideas. I was thinking a lot about how it's going to be harder than ever to like look for bids, just because of the nature of how everyone's coming back, like the trauma that people have gone through all of this experience with COVID, and now all of the protests over race. And even if we have to wear masks, like that's going to be another thing that's going to be making it even harder. So I think we're just going to have to work harder than ever to continue to reach out to people and connect with them. So I I really like the idea of tracking what you're working on and being accountable for it. So thanks for sharing that idea, Mary Jane.
That makes me think too, not everybody has done this work that we're doing, this self-reflective work, this understanding of all the judgments that we bring to conversations. And so when we return to school, people might have made judgments in their minds about general things, and then you come up and just start trying to have a conversation, and their judgments are flooding in. And so like we need to understand too that like we're trying so hard to not judge on our side and be open, but that not everybody else has done this work, and so judgments might be coming from their side even though we didn't really do anything to warrant them. And so I think that that's something that it's heavy in knowing that like because of everything, because of the distance, because of the fear from isolation, because of the race conversations, whatever it is, like there may be new judgments that are coming with them when they come back. And so to be persistent with our bids and keep coming back to help reassure and clear those judgments from the mind of the person across from you. And it's not your job. You can't change the way that they think, but absolutely, I think the persistence is going to be the key to making sure we're overcoming judgments that people are bringing back with them because of this, literally this trauma. I mean, like there's no other word for it than trauma that now everyone has been through, from the teachers to the admin to the students. And we are all still in the midst of it, and really processing those emotions and our feelings and our judgments and what we believe. We're going to have to be even more open to potentially having emotions come at us even though we didn't deserve what came our way. And I think that's going to mean some strong armor on our part and a believing the best on our part that is very consistent, and an ability to say, I'm going to come back around kind of thing. So that's what that made me think of. Well, we've hit our hour, ladies, and it was an awesome hour. My goodness, so many great things shared. I will, of course, share this recording and promote, and I hope everybody gets a chance to watch. But any other closing thoughts before we split? Well, let's reconnect on Voxer about what we learn in the webinar this afternoon. If you hear something that's great from Joelle and Killian, share that, because maybe not everybody gets a chance. But if you haven't yet, if you go back to my email, you can still register, I think, for that and get a recording. So even if you can't be there, you can catch it. And then our next chapter, oh, I just forgot the title of it. It is Common Ground, Finding Common Ground. So that's chapter 7. And we've already done 8, and then we'll jump ahead to 9, which is Building Trust, and that's the end. So we'll do 2 more weeks. Next week, we'll do Finding Common Ground, and then the next week, we'll try and do Building Trust. So if you want to keep on reading and sharing in the Voxer, keeping the conversation going, just really love having that as a connection with y'all. And to Becky's point, you're not isolated. We are together. Reach out, so that we can connect and feel like, as coaches, we have peers to talk to. All right, friends. Have a great morning. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Bye. Thanks for coming early.
Bye.